Hi, Greg Weldon here, your host of Money, Markets, and New Age Investing. This is Season 2, Episode 8. And man, do we have a lot to talk about. We are 2 days removed now from the presidential debate in the U.S. It's unfortunate that we don't have at least one really strong candidate when it comes to discussing policy. There's no discussion of policy there. There really wasn't. What there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of bickering. I would say that, certainly Biden, I don't like to get political, but it's going to be tough to defend the policies that have put this country in the position we're in. We're a laughingstock overseas. We look weak overseas. The dynamic around Afghanistan was a really good example of that. The dynamic around maybe the Russian invasion wouldn't even have happened if it weren't for this administration's, weak appearance outwardly. I think that's an interesting point. You talk about the border. Come on, man. There's no defending this policy where you have people now literally living in luxury hotels at the expense of veterans and stuff like that. A lot of hyperbole, a lot of rhetoric, certainly falsehoods from both sides. I'm not defending or supporting either side, frankly. But I do believe that in a situation where you cannot allow Joe Biden to be president again. And I have said since day one when they agreed to debate, I said that behind the scenes, this is some kind of Democratic plot to expose him and to get him out because they know they can't beat Trump with Biden. There's no way. And my suspicion is, and this is crazy because this is what we do is, I learned to do this a long time ago when I worked for a hedge fund in New York under one of the most brilliant traders, thinkers, theorizers, people I've ever known, Louis Bacon. We used to sit around and what if every situation to death and come up with all kinds of crazy scenarios that could pop off because you never can tell. And one of those crazy scenarios, especially knowing that Barack Obama has been key in trying to prep Biden for this debate where he was holed up at Camp David all week with rooms that were made to look like the debate room, with questions that were probably already given to the Biden camp. I don't doubt that for a second, although I think, relatively speaking, CNN did a better job than I expected they would, so I'll give them some kudos for that. But the dynamic around, what's going on in the background, what if they drafted Michelle Obama? Just think about that for a minute. It's not as outrageous as it sounds. She's very well liked. Obama wasn't the worst president in history. Certainly, I'm not going to be voting for an Obama ticket, but nonetheless, you could say that would be preferable, certainly to the Democrats, to Joe Biden. Come on. And that this way, Barack, with his experience of 8 years in the White House, and Michelle, with her experiences 8 years as the first lady, at least have some comfort level in doing the job. And you feel, well, Barack would kind of, pseudo be running things. That's not a knock on Michelle, but she doesn't have the experience. It's a really interesting thought process. Now, some people say, oh, you bring back Hillary. Yeah, she's just not liked enough, and she's a liar. Everyone knows it. You bring in Gavin Newsom, forget about it. He can't beat Trump. Gavin Newsom is way too radical on his side. He's much like DeSantis, way too radical on his side. I think DeSantis, the way he's governed Florida, spectacular. Absolutely 100% spectacular. And a lot of people want to bash Florida, but I'll tell you what. It's a rip-roaring state with all kinds of freedoms that are not going to ever be infringed upon as long as as long as the powers that be maintain control of Florida and Texas. At least you have a refuge from this liberal thing that they want to say is in the name of protecting democracy. It's ludicrous. It's quite obvious going after Trump makes us a banana republic looking country to everybody out there. So in that context, I think one of the biggest things that kind of ticks me off is when the powers that be, the media lie. Joe Scarborough, for example. I don't watch him. I don't know much about him. What I do know is he's the guy that, was FU, right? If you don't think Biden is fully capable of doing his job. Well, guess what, Joe Scarborough? FU. You're a liar. All right, you talk to the guy every day. You should have known. His wife should know. She's out there pushing him still. It's ridiculous. It's embarrassing. I heard someone call it elder abuse. And frankly, you can make that case. And the degree to which Joe Scarborough posted today on his Twitter feed a story from The Hill about debt and how Donald Trump's policies were responsible for twice as much debt creation as Joe Biden. It's a lie. You lie about his health. You lie about his policies. You lie about the impact. You lie that no soldiers have gotten killed. Oh, my God, the families of the soldiers that have been killed under Biden's watch are furious. As well they should be. It's a joke. We're a laughing stock with this guy as president. And to the extent that you want to make up lies, and you go after your political opponents, hey, Donald Trump is a blowhard buffoon. I mean, he is. He doesn't know when to keep his mouth shut. He thinks he's smarter. He wants everyone to think he's smarter than he really is. He's not that smart. All right. He's got the vocabulary of an 8th grader, and he's got the patience and the inner calm of a 6-year-old. When he's attacked, he lashes out. He can't keep his mouth shut. All right. He's a child. And if it weren't for family money, he'd probably be broke all his life. All right. But the bottom line is his policies are preferable to those that are in place right now. It's that simple. He's united the Republican Party because Joe Biden's so bad that it's divided the Democratic Party to the point where they're on the verge of fracturing, where the powers that be want to maintain power because they don't care if Biden can't really, govern, because they'll govern for him. It's the younger faction of the Democratic Party that's all bent out of shape because he's a joke and he's a laughingstock internationally, and we can't have that. But when you start lying, as Joe Scarborough did today on Twitter, that Joe Biden has created half as much debt as Donald Trump is responsible for twice as much debt creation, it's a straight up lie. The numbers are what they are. You can't dispute the math. And here's the math. Donald Trump, in his presidency, the public debt rose by $7.77 trillion. Under Biden, $6.84. So Trump did theoretically create more debt. Having said that, almost half, 3.25, almost half of the 7.7, 3.25, was created in the second quarter of 2020. 1 quarter pandemic relief to basically save the economy. Now, I'm not going to throw in the third and fourth quarters, which I could, because Biden had a couple of quarters with COVID relief as well in the first quarter, second quarter of 2021. You take those 4 quarters, they match off against one another pretty well. Bottom line is, if you exclude the second quarter of 2020, Donald Trump, under his presidency, public debt rose by $4.3 trillion. Under Biden, $6.8. It's not true that Donald Trump's presidency created twice as much debt as Joe Biden's. Not even close. Joe Biden's presidency, excluding the second quarter of 2020, created almost 50% more debt than has Trump. And he's not done yet. That's only through the first quarter of this year at $34.586 trillion, up from when he took office at $26.477. So again, 34.6, up from 26.5, 6.8 trillion under Biden. Not only that, under President Trump, the Fed shrank their balance sheet. Under Biden, the balance sheet is still twice as large as it's ever been, even though it has come down by 1.1 trillion over the last 52 weeks. It's still twice as high. So you want to start playing political games, you could say that the Fed has supported Biden while the Fed was doing QT while Trump was president. And that's a fact. Straight up fact. Let's talk about inflation a little bit. Because, of course, the Biden camp is just in denial. I mean, Janet Yellen, the interview with Janet Yellen, when are they going to retire her? She needs to be put out to pasture. So a lot of these people need to be put out to pasture. It's really pathetic. This is our country. It's the best we have. Come on, man. All right, let's talk inflation. Already, they're, kind of wanting to declare victory over inflation. Prices have come down. Well, inflation's come down. Prices have not come down. That's a lie. To say prices have come down is a straight up lie. Prices have come down over Joe Biden. It's not true. All right, the rate of inflation for May was 0 for the month. All right, it was running at 3.6 to 4.8, and now it just collapsed to 0. Almost all of that decrease came because gasoline prices fell by 3.2% during the month. In fact, gasoline prices were up year over year by 2.2. Even the change in gasoline on a year-over-year basis was higher than the Fed's target. And guess what? Gasoline's coming from minus 25 Energy is coming from minus 30 plus, and it's back into positive territory. Every major component of inflation, the four components being all items, food, energy, and all items less food and energy, are all above 2%. In fact, food is the only one below 3, and it's going up. Again, services, excluding energy, 5.4, and it's been sticking there for months. Electricity, 5.7. Food away from home, 4%, and on the rise. What's deflating? Furniture, appliances, and household items. Why? Because consumers aren't buying them, so that you have now price discounting. It's a war of attrition, not only on the behalf of consumers who can't afford to buy stuff like furniture and clothes, but among those that sell that stuff, now cutting prices to try and get business, to try and maintain market share, to try and stay alive. Business is trying to stay alive. Consumers trying to stay alive. I've already run through the numbers with you from the New York Fed household survey about how many more people feel much worse off or worse off now than they did a year ago, and how many people expect to be much worse off or worse off a year from now. It's way higher than it was before the pandemic. Way higher, like hugely higher and completely flip-flopped, versus the people expect to feel much better. The percentage of people expect to feel much worse 12 months from now is higher than those expecting to feel much better, and that's a rarity. A rarity. Got to go way back to find that. And when we talk about retail sales, all right, let me just touch on inflation one more time. And in terms of inflation, when you talk about the places where the most people live, aka cities, the inflation rate's through the roof. 8 of the 16 cities for which the BLS gives us inflation numbers are above 4%. That's half. Half of the 16 major cities in this country have inflation above 4. 14 of them are above 3. There's only one that's below 2%, and that's Tampa at 1.8, which is shocking because I think if you ask anyone who lives in Tampa, they're not going to tell you inflation is 1.8. Boston, 4. Dallas, 5. LA, 4. Miami, 4.5. Seattle, 4.4. Philly, 4.1. St. Louis, 4. New York City, 3.9. Chicago is a low one at 3.1, but it's up from 3. And most of these cities rose in inflation in the month of May. In that context, let's talk about retail sales, because retail sales have been $600 billion a month since January of 2023. They have not moved in 16 months. The change is less than 1% over the last 16 months in dollar terms, and that includes inflation of 4%, 3.5% to 4%. So thus, real retail sales are negative. And this shows up in terms of the percentage changes, in terms of the dollar numbers. We've looked at this before, okay? The only other times, all right, where we've seen real retail sales in negative territory was in the tech bubble crash, the global financial crisis, and the pandemic. That's it. And now, not only that, we've been in outright deflation in real retail sales 5 months in a row, 19 of the last 20 months, and 24 of the last 27 months, dating all the way back to 2022. How does Joe Biden defend that? And why isn't Donald Trump asking him these questions? I mean, yeah, Trump did a great job, relatively speaking, but he did a terrible job in terms of having specifics. Data, man, data's the king. When you have data, you're king because you can prove your points. It's not just opinion. It's not just falsehoods. It's not just rhetoric. It's not just hyperbole. It's fact. The fact of the matter is people feel much worse off, and it's because of inflation and because even income is barely keeping up. Savings are gone. Credit cards are maxed out, and delinquency rates are skyrocketing like we haven't seen since 2007. I gave you all those numbers in the last podcast we did. So the Fed says they don't want to wait for something to break. Stuff's breaking. The housing market is still cracking. The housing data that came out in the last 6 business days was horrific. Horrific. Multi-year lows in just about everything from supply to demand. Let's take a look. Let's start with the sales side. New home sales, 619,000, annualized number. That's how they do it, seasonally adjusted annualized rate. New home sales, 619,000. They're expected 640. All right, last month was 634, was expected at 680. And you were just at 700. Now you're pressing 600. And below 600,000 is recession levels. All right, here's the year-over-year changes in new homes sold. In the U.S., overall, down 16.5% year over year. In the East, down 43.8%. In the South, down 17.7%. In the West, down 20.9%. Now, the number of new homes for sale rose by 12.9%. The problem is this is going to peter out because starts, permits, and completions are crashing. So, and the sales are just purely a function. The supply increase is purely a function of the lack of sales. That's particularly true in existing homes. Existing home sales, 4.11 million annual rate in the month of May, just reported this week, rather. All right, it's down 3% year over year. Prices up 6%. Prices at a record high. And sales below 4, you don't see that often below 4 million. And at the level now, you have violated the uptrend line in existing home sales that dates back to 1982. I'll send you these charts. I'll send you my piece on housing if you want to see them. Again, the stats don't lie. The statistics just don't lie. And we're talking about housing. It's really bad. You're violating the uptrend line in existing home sales go back to 1982. Now, what's interesting in this context is that as sales are collapsing and prices are rising and mortgage rates haven't come down, all right, you actually see existing sales, the inventory starting to rise. All right, it's up 80,000 homes in May. That's on top of 90,000 in April. These are months we should be selling homes, right? Instead, we're not selling them, and the inventory is increasing. And this is a good thing to some degree. And the NAR says that, well, the increasing inventory should allow some of the supply side to loosen up. And, and maybe it doesn't say slow price, rather, it doesn't say bring prices down, but slow the pace of gain of prices. Of course, then they went on to mention that the average mortgage payment right now is more than double, quote unquote, more than double what it was in 2020, before 2020, I should say, before the pandemic. Average mortgage payment on a new home, the new purchase, more than double what it was before 2020, according to the NAR, National Association of Realtors. In the last 5 months, every single month, inventory has increased on existing homes for sale. It's up by 290,000 in 5 months. 18.5% year over year, was up 6.7% in May alone. But it's all a function of declining sales. And let me tell you, when the Fed turns and cuts rates and mortgage rates comes down, prices will skyrocket. It will be a feeding frenzy. It really will be. All right? But because the supply is not, the pipeline is bad when it comes to supply. All right? New housing starts, 1.28 million. They're expecting 1.38. It was 100,000 homes less than expected. All right? 2 months ago, it was 1.4. Now it's 1.27. From 1.42 to 1.27 in 3 months. Not only that, starts at a 3-year low, and it violated a 13-year uptrend. Permits at 1.4 were expected to be 1.5, and they're down from 1.55 3 months ago. Completions are down 6% year over year. So starts, permits, completions, all down big, all multi-year lows, all violating multi-year, if not multi-decade trend lines. You think you've seen home price inflation already? Wait till the Fed starts cutting interest rates. I mean, really, you're going to have a whole nother rabid market in housing where prices are going to skyrocket. Maybe mortgage rates come down enough to make it affordable. We'll see. All right. Commercial real estate's not out of the woods. Delinquencies on office rates are now almost 7%. They were 1 a year and a half ago. Overall, CMBS delinquency rate is closing in on 5. All right. There was an office building recently sold in New York City, and what's interesting is we're finally selling these buildings, and we're finding out just how deep the price cuts are. All right, as much as 90%. On average, in San Francisco, you're down 45%. The one building sold in Manhattan that's really famous, 1740 Broadway. I know this building. I used to walk by it all the time. All right. The bondholders took a blood bath. Okay? Took a bloodbath. Anything that was below A-rated, Class A bondholders, lost 100%. Anything double A minus, A minus, B, triple B minus, double B minus, or B plus, junk, essentially. And of that, basically, you're talking about, oh gosh, I don't know, overall was over $100 million just obliterated. All right? Even the top class only got 74 cents on the dollar on their bonds. So this is a problem. Look at the banks. I mean, look at the banks. If you're not a money center bank or a consumer lender, you're doing really poorly. And, stuff like New York Community Bank and some of the other banks that are, less than 10 billion in assets that hold a large amount. The small banks in the U.S. with less than 10 billion in assets hold 35% of commercial real estate loans. And I mean, these stocks are mostly on their lows. And the community and the regional bank index is breaking down again. So what do we do here? Well, there's some bright spots. I mean, there's always bright spots. And I think, one of the things, and just to get back to the election real quick, because I do want to mention this before we get to strategy. There was someone that put this to me on Twitter, and I thought this was really interesting. Maybe they want Biden to run because they know he'll lose. And we know no matter what happens here, there's going to be a recession. You have a consumer that's choking. You got businesses that are choking. All right. That the Democrats want to let Trump take blame for the recession and then swoop back in 2028. And that's interesting. It's not without merit, that thought process. It isn't. I don't give them that much credit, and I don't think anyone wants to relinquish power, especially Joe Biden. But I thought that was an interesting sideline. So what do we do? What's the strategies here? Well, I can tell you, right now, energy all of a sudden starting to look good. All right, crude oil inventories down 5 of the last 9 weeks for a total of 1.7 million barrels over that period. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot because it isn't. But it's a major build period in the spring where you should be seeing inventories increase. All right, you're now 6 million barrels below the year-ago level. You're below the 5-year average. And part of this, of course, is demand. Gasoline. I mean, input to refineries in the most recent week was over 17 million barrels per day. That's up from 16.4. That's a 3.7% year-over-year increase in demand from refineries. And this is why the deferred, what we call the forwards, which is the 12-month swap rate from December. So from December of 2024 to December of 2025, it's a $5 nearby price premium because that's how badly the market wants to bring crude to market for delivery to meet demand. Demand is high. If we include this strategic petroleum reserve, which, of course, Joe Biden, in his wisdom, has decided to liquidate so he could try and maintain oil prices and keep WTI below $80, it's worked, but it's worked to the expense that you've gone down by 100 million barrels it took. 10.3% from where you were in 2022. Right now, the USO is the crude oil ETF. It looks like it's breaking out. So I like energy here in terms of crude oil. I do think that uranium and I also think crypto are in corrective modes. Gold and silver in corrective modes. I just did a piece on where are the buy zones because these are major buys on a long-term basis. Nothing has changed fundamentally in any of these markets, but you do have liquidation and you have a stronger dollar. And this is the thing. When you talk about where the stock market is, what's interesting is the Fed remains tight. The Fed, the QT right now, in other words, the rolling off of bonds from the Fed spreadsheets running at $1.1 trillion over the last 52 weeks. And it's a little bit less than it had been, but it's still $1.1 trillion, which previous to the last few weeks would have been the most ever, is the most ever. So, and with an interest rate of 5.5 against an inflation rate below 3.5, the Fed's policy rate is punitively tight. Their bond policy is tightening. The Fed's tightening right now into an economy that's clearly weakening, into a consumer that's maxed out on credit cards with delinquencies through the roof, that are not spending on discretionary items. I will tell you this specifically. When we talk about discretionary items, by the way, all right, I will specifically note two that are always strong, especially when gasoline prices are down. And gasoline prices were down so much in May, you would have thought that online shopping and eating and drinking establishments sales would have been up, but they weren't. All right, food and drinking establishments sales fell in May. They fell on online sales in April, and on a year-over-year basis, they're coming down hard, 6.8, which is, had been running double digits for months and months and months and months and months ever since the pandemic is coming down. The year-over-year rate in food and drinking establishments just in May on the monthly decline, which is really rare, especially when gasoline sales are down, because it's a 3-to-2 correlation. For every $3 saved at the gas station, $2 are spent online or eating and drinking establishments. That got blown out of the water here. Gasoline sales were down, and sales in non-store retailers were down last month, and sales in food and drink establishments down this month. And the year-over-year rate in eating and drinking establishment sales just fell from 6. It had been running 8, but it fell from 6 in April to 3.8 against a 3.4 inflation rate. That's barely positive. Consumers are cocooning. It's as evident as it can be in the data. So what do we do? Well, again, energy. Okay, I think there's buy zones in some of these commodities, but not yet. I still like the DBA, which is the agricultural commodity ETF. But I also if you want to talk XLC, the communication services sector of the S&P 500, it made a new high this week, a new all-time high. It's broken out against the S&P 500, and not many indexes are doing that outside of Infotech. It's up 8% against the broader market over the last 52 weeks. It includes Google and Meta, both of which I really like. Okay, Netflix, EA Sports, and T-Mobile are also top performers there. But I got to tell you, what's the most impressive looking stock right there right now? And I'm going to cringe when I say that. You might cringe when you hear it. AT&T. It's a major trend reversal from levels that in the past have marked real value below $20 a share for AT&T. It's breaking a 2-year trend line. It has all kinds of turning momentum. It's been a major laggard. The service, from what I understand, I don't use AT&T, but what I understand, people that use AT&T, they don't like it. But I tell you what, from a stock perspective, it's been beaten to death, and it's breaking out, and the whole sector is breaking out. We've allocated to the XLC. We're also allocating to real estate. And what's interesting about real estate is I want to keep an eye on the MBB. It's an ETF that measures the mortgage-backed securities market. Interest rates come down, mortgage rates come down, this thing will explode. All right? It's if you get through 92.76 on the MBB, that's mom, boy, you would be a medium-term breakout, and above 94.55 would be a major secular low in the mortgage-backed securities market, meaning mortgage rates coming down. That's a great way to play it. So keep that in mind. I also like the XLRE. Even Simon Property Group, with malls and still kind of in trouble, is going for a second bull leg, confirmation for a longer-term upside breakout. And when you see, something like that happen, you kind of know. Bad news, to some degree, outside of office space, has been priced. And then we have Infotech. Now, Infotech looks fatigued, I got to say. The distribution, the on-balance volume, even the NASDAQ, you're really widely owned here. You've had huge ownership increase in the second quarter. You just have. It's fatigued technically. Look at Friday. It was a downside-tailed candlestick reversal of technical significance. All right, I like Apple. It just broke out. It's fresh. It's been an underperformer. I also say if you attached .com in 1999, 2000, and the stock would take off. These days, there's two things you can attach that work like .com. Number one is the word networks. Look at Arista Networks. Look at Palo Alto Networks, top performers. Or app. Just say it's an app. Look at NetApp. Now, if that doesn't look 1999, 2000, I don't know what does. But what I do like within the sector besides Apple is also old school going new school, Applied Materials, and Oracle kind of out of nowhere. Now, I can certainly show you more of all of this. We do this every single day. We have the portfolio playbook that we put out. We have the global macro strategy report that we put out, and we could do a gold specific piece. I'd be happy to give you samples of that. You can email me at sales at weldononline.com. That's WELDON online, one word, weldononline.com. And anything that you heard me mention here, whether it's housing, whether it's the federal debt, whether it's retail sales, whether it's consumer prices, I have recent reports on all of that. Make sure to check us out on Twitter. I tweet a lot of really interesting stories from Bloomberg and Reuters, and that is at Weldon Live. And certainly check us out on our podcast Twitter, which is at money_podcast. Check us out on YouTube. I am Gregory_Weldon on YouTube, and can check out the podcast Money, Markets, and New Age Investing also on YouTube and on Facebook. That's it for this month. Thanks a lot. Keep it safe out there.